Now, all members, we have a bumper question paper ahead of us, and I hope, however, we will be done by lunch. We turn then to question one, and I call on the Honourable Member for Arbroath Town Mallow, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Chief Minister whether there has been any restrictions on flags which can be flown from government buildings.
On the Chief Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, Government Circular number 0013/2012 relates to instructions for the flying of flags on or at Isle of Man government buildings. This document makes the point that the flag refers to the Manx flag. However, there is provision within the document that, with the permission of the Chief Minister or the Chief Secretary, a flag other than the Manx flag may be flown on a government building. This document was most recently circulated in April this year. This circular also gives guidance on the flying of flags and how to request permission to display a flag other than the Manx flag. Each request received by the Chief Secretary or myself is considered on a case-by-case basis, and appropriate consideration is given to the impact of approving or declining that request. Requests to display any flag other than the Manx flag have been infrequent, but it would be exceptionally rare for a reasonable request to be declined.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you for Chief Minister. In addition to the documentation mentioned, in the last 5 years, has any advice been given on flags, and has any concerns been raised about the need to update or remove any flags? Thank you.
Chief Minister to reply.
Not that I'm aware of, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Are concerns about flags directed back to those responsible for flying them? Some flags, like the Ukrainian flag, have been welcomed, whilst others have been questioned, and some have suggested there should be no alternative flags. In terms of this area, is it potential that a divide could occur between central government and other areas of government, given that the documentation is quite brief in outlining what other flags can be used? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Chief Minister to reply.
Well, as I've outlined, Mr Speaker, that it's at the discretion of the Chief Secretary and indeed myself. As I've said, reasonable requests I doubt would be declined. But, the statement is very clear that the Manx flag, the flag described as to be flown from government buildings predominantly is the Manx flag.
Turn to question two. I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to ask the Chief Minister what progress has been made towards the creation of a central project unit.
Call on the Chief Minister to reply.
Mr Speaker, this matter remains under consideration. Whilst there is an overriding recognition that major projects need more oversight, we must also be clear on the future of the Department of Infrastructure and its remit. I can assure honourable members that we will be bringing forward reform proposals for the Department for Infrastructure to Tynwald in October, and that we'll also outline with that how we propose to enhance capital projects oversight.
Supplementary question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And while I appreciate the Chief Minister's statement and that obviously this is linked with the reform of DOI, would the Chief Minister agree with me that this has now been under consideration for many years? It's something that seems to keep coming up and then quieting down again. And would the Chief Minister also agree that project management is quite a specialist area and that the officers have enough within the departments to be doing day to day? Many of them are not qualified in project management, and are we not setting people up to fail with the current system?
Chief Minister to reply.
Yes, this has been flagged up for a number of years, and indeed in the last sort of 4 years, I think it was myself as the former Treasury Minister who flagged this up. The Honourable Member Questioner, who was also sat on the last Council of Ministers, will recognise that a 114-page report was produced by Beamans. That document is available for parties to read. He will recognise that a huge number of issues were brought up in there. As I said, currently working, I've started work with the previous Minister and now the new Minister for the Department for Infrastructure. We'll bring forward our plans in October and outline in there how capital project oversight should now be improved, and I look forward to contribution from other honourable members as we outline those proposals.
The supplementary, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Chief Minister mentioned the Beamans report, and if members refer to the Beamans report, on page 58, it actually singled out the fact that Treasury formerly had a capital projects unit, and the Beeman's Review actually singled that out for praise in the way that it worked. Can I ask the Chief Minister, would he agree that actually no two capital projects are necessarily the same, and the qualifications and experience may change per project? So one of the actual advantages of having a central project unit is their ability to be able to call on expertise as and when required, which may not be there in the individual departments.
Chief Minister.
It's very kind of the honourable questioner to highlight that the praise due to my former department, Mr. Speaker. I do agree. I mean, we need the full ability and range of expertise when we're dealing with such extensive capital projects. The Beeman's report and indeed the previous council talked about this £3 million limit in terms of size and scale of capital projects. As I said, Mr. Speaker, I think it is absolutely vital that we do get absolute clarity on this. Part of the interlink there, though, is ensuring that we've got clear framework and understanding of the role of the Department for Infrastructure and the skills available to the Department of Infrastructure to undertake this work, and indeed not just that department but other departments who are engaged in this process. There's still quite a lot of work to be done, but there will be papers in front of Tynwald in October, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to both clarifying the position with central capital projects and also how the Department of Infrastructure will function moving forward.
Final supplementary on this question, Mr. Ashford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Final supplementary. The Chief Minister's made quite a few references to the review of the Department of Infrastructure. Can I ask the Chief Minister, is the current thinking then that any capital projects unit would sit within the Department of Infrastructure or whatever bodies may come out of the review?
Chief Minister to reply.
I think I'll save that the answer to that, Mr. Speaker, to the papers that we'll lay before Tynwald in the near future.
Question 3, again calling the Honourable Member for Arbury Castown Maloo, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Chief Minister if he will provide an update on the appointment of non-executive ministerial advisors. Thank you.
Chief Minister to reply.
I refer back to my statement that I made to Tynwald Court on the 17th of May, Mr. Speaker, and at that point I said it's clear that governance, performance and standards need improvement across government. The Council of Ministers has already discussed the idea of non-executive ministerial advisors, and indeed the DOI Minister has appointed such to assist and advise him. We will produce and release codes of governance for the appointment now of such non-executives to departmental boards to provide more challenging levels of advice and scrutiny to government performance. These will be laid before Tynwald in July. Appointing such will be at the discretion of the Minister, but in appointing non-executives, I must be clear that the policy will be decided by Council of Ministers and political members alone, with advice from officials. That's the position I made the commitment to on Tuesday the 17th of May and remains the current position.
Supplementary question, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. In terms of the detail, will that include a reference to the cost of this initiative? And in terms of accessing the information regarding the non-executive ministerial advisors, will that also be included so people can actually get more detail in terms of what is going on? We've had one appointment in this area already, and there doesn't appear to be any detailed provision in terms of the individual and their background and other related material. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chief Minister to reply.
Well, absolutely, Mr. Speaker. I expect that we'll put forward some codes of governance which will indeed answer the honourable member's questions.
Further supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chief Minister. How will these advisors retain an independent thought? Will they be given fixed-term, non-renewable contracts? And has the danger of existing civil servants taking on these roles and the civil service actually growing in a secondary way being actively considered? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I welcome the honourable member's questions, Mr. Speaker, but as I've committed to in my statement on the 17th of May and recommitted to now, we will produce and release the codes of governance for these appointments, and I hope that the honourable member's questions will be answered. I don't see there's any purpose in me trying to preempt that now, or any benefit to honourable members in me preempting that when I very much hope that Tynwald will allow this to be debated in July.
Question 4, calling the Honourable Member for Oldcombe, Mr. Collister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister for Treasury what consideration has been given for the introduction of an interest-free loan scheme to help with the cost of living?
On the Treasury Minister to reply.
Mr. Speaker, Treasury has already announced a significant package of support that has been and is being provided to the most vulnerable, as well as those on low and fixed incomes. I can confirm that given the sustained high rate of inflation, the Council of Ministers are actively considering what further help should be provided to individuals and when. Mr Speaker, it's currently Treasury's view that the introduction of interest-free loans would not be an appropriate intervention to relieve some of the current pressures associated with the increased cost of living. Adding debt repayments, even at low or no interest rates, to individuals and families who are already struggling to meet their existing essential outgoings could serve to exacerbate their situation. Therefore, Treasury's view is that any further support which may become available should be provided through direct, targeted, non-recoverable payments, as has been the case to date. However, due to the volatility of the current economic situation on Ireland and around the world, this position will be kept under review. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response. I think, as the Minister said, most of the support that's been given is for the most vulnerable, but there is always those that sit just above the thresholds. And the scheme that's being trialled in Wales from September, that was from a trial that originally started in Manchester, does allow borrowers to access funds between £100 and £2,000, and most of them, on average, around £500. Would the Minister not agree this is a perfect opportunity for local authorities, charities and government to come together to help people get through this cost of living crisis that not just we're facing here in the Isle of Man, but those in the UK and further afield?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think everyone is aware of the pressures being put on individuals, but every individual circumstance is different. I would draw honourable members' attention to the Debt Counselling Service, which has done extensive work helping those families who are struggling with debt by giving them practical advice, both through their confidential free phone telephone line, but also the drop-in sessions every Wednesday at the Western Wellbeing Centre in Peel. We also have advice available from the Citizens Advice Service, the Salvation Army and the Credit Union, who have done a lot of work in terms of helping those on low incomes who are struggling with repayments reschedule these. And there's also emergency grants and loans available from the Social Services Division. So what I would say to people who may be struggling to pay their bills is that the help is out there, but please ask for that help and it will be provided in a very confidential way and will hopefully help them navigate their way through any potential problems they have paying bills at the moment. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Collister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his reply. My reason for the question is because we all know about payday loans and etc. Isn't this a perfect opportunity, as I said, for government, charities and the other sectors to actually come together to help people get through this cost of living crisis?
Minister to reply.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I understand the concerns about what are colloquially called payday loans. That situation doesn't really seem to exist on the island, but obviously Treasury are monitoring the situation in terms of people who've taken out overdrafts and working with the banking sector to facilitate this. But I completely agree with him that there are a range of different organisations out there at the moment who are willing to help members of our community who may be struggling. And again, I would urge those people who may be finding themselves in difficulty to please ask for that advice at an early stage. Thank you.
Further supplementary, Mr. Ashford.
Mr Speaker, I'll combine two questions in one, if I may. Would the Treasury Minister agree with me that the schemes that have been designed to help people are not cliff edge schemes? There is actually taper amounts actually above the thresholds, so it tapers off, and that was deliberately done so that people wouldn't actually just come to a crashing halt if they were £1 over the limits. And would the Treasury Minister also agree that government setting up loan schemes was always deliberately avoided, because otherwise all you're doing is you're potentially putting future debt on people that would struggle to pay that debt, and all you're doing is pushing off the dreaded day? And would the Treasury Minister further agree that in fact the UK has seen sense in this, because the UK has now started converting what was their government loans into actually being grants?
Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm more than happy to agree with the honourable member because he was instrumental in setting up the schemes in the first place. And what we are dealing here is by giving financial support not just to those people who are already known to Treasury and the Social Services Division, but also those people who, as the honourable member says, fall through the gaps and perhaps wouldn't necessarily be on the radar of social services, but are still having difficulties. I also agree with him in terms of the concerns about building up future debt which then will become another problem later on, as hopefully we weather the storm of the current inflationary pressures, but look forward to a time when the volatility that we're currently experiencing stabilises. Thank you.
Final supplementary, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank again the Minister for his responses this morning. I'm not asking the government to set up a loan scheme. What I'm asking for is the government to work with the third sector, local authorities and other sectors to actually be able to help people to run a scheme through potentially our credit union in order to help those who may be struggling to pay bills this winter. Therefore, can I ask the Minister if he would look again at this scheme to help people as we go into a very difficult period in the autumn and the winter this year?
First Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for his final supplementary question. As I've said in the answer to the previous questions, these schemes already exist. The credit union have done some very good work. They've been assisted by Treasury. We also have Citizens Advice Service, the Debt Counselling Service, the Salvation Army and the Social Services Division, all willing to provide that help, both in terms of practical advice but also logistical advice. And as I say again, the details of accessing that information, that advice is available, and I would urge anyone who's finding that the current inflationary pressures is putting strain on their finances to seek that help at an early stage. Thank you.
Question 5. I'll call the Honourable Member for Arbroath Malou, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Treasury how government support for individual energy bills is being paid out and why each available method of payment has been chosen. Thank you.
Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Treasury has this year provided additional financial support towards both increased fuel bills and the increased cost of living generally through a series of measures. An increase of £100 to the usual winter bonus and a widening of eligibility to groups not usually entitled to it was paid in January. A further £100 additional winter bonus was paid in March. Energy support payments of £300 paid to recipients of income-related benefits was paid in late April to early May. Family support payments worth up to £400 paid to families getting child benefit was paid in May. And long-term benefit support payments of £150 for pensioners and other recipients of long-term benefits who didn't qualify for the energy support to be paid now or in July. With just a few exceptions, this additional support has been paid and will be paid to qualifying individuals in the same way as they get their state pensions or social security benefits. That is by either direct credit transfers to their bank account or in cash at the post office using a MyCard. Payment in this way is allowed for help to be delivered to qualifying individuals as quickly as possible, as Social Security already holds the necessary information for direct credit transfers, and the MyCard service is able to accommodate the additional payments. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that detailed answer. The MyCard's got an advantage because when the payments are made, it is clearly coming for a different reason. The problem with all the other schemes is that this extra money shows through as just an increase in the money that's being received from the government. And I think that's causing confusion. The government doesn't appear to have sent any separate communication advising people that these payments should be used for dealing with the energy challenges. And we've got a situation now where many people have received this money and they've allocated it to other things. Has the department actually considered this situation? So a simple change like having a separate backs payment, identifying what the money is for, might encourage people to refocus that money on the purpose that the government wants it to be spent on. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Treasury Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I've just explained, these payments have been made not only to help people with increased energy costs, but also the increased costs of life in general. I don't think it's Treasury's role to dictate to people how they spend money that's provided to them by benefits. In terms of informing people why they're getting that extra money in their account, I think Treasury have been quite clear in terms of press releases, in terms of the information that's been put out there. And if people are querying why they have more money in their bank account from Treasury, I'd be more than happy for them to phone the Benefits Office where this explanation will be given. But again, Mr Speaker, I really do not think it's Treasury's role to dictate to people how and when they spend the income that's been given to them. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that interesting perspective on this. I remain concerned that we're allocating a massive £6.3 million to helping people over this really challenging period. The problem is that this money is dripping into people's bank accounts and they've got other things on their mind. It might be a holiday, it might be some other consideration. And without the clear pointers that this is help that's been directed to help them with specific up-and-coming needs, that is a concern, because I'm really worried that these people, in weeks to come when the energy bills come, because it's not a weekly thing with energy bills, it's every quarter, it's every month, it's over a long period of time, and people who are challenged with day-to-day issues, the food bills and everything else, they may not actually be looking at spending it with that level of focus that the department's hoping it will be done. So is any additional research being done to ensure this is happening? I know the Minister's given an opinion on the spend. I've given an opinion on the spend. It's slightly different, but has the department done anything in terms of assessing where this money is going? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Treasury Minister.
I think Treasury and Government try not to patronise the people who have voted and put us here. In terms of the question from the Honourable Member, we've quite clearly flagged these payments up as stage supports that will continue as we reassess the current pressures that people on this island are under, with targeted benefits to help them through a difficult time period. As I commented to a previous question, if people are finding that they're running into debt or are finding that their budgeting is coming under pressure, there are a whole range of services available, both from the state and the third sector, that can assist them in doing so. Thank you.
Question 6. No. Question 6. I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr. Wallenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister of the Treasury how much financial support was released to charities during COVID-19 from A, the Treasury, and B, dormant bank accounts.
From the Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, it's not possible to provide a comprehensive answer to the total level of COVID-19 financial support offered to charities by the Treasury, as data relating to the constitutional makeup of each applicant was not collected. The predominant source of COVID-19 support payments offered by Treasury to business was by way of the salary support scheme, and the details of payments made from the scheme can be found online. With regards to the second section of the question, £657,000 has been provided to the Manx Lottery Trust, funded by dormant bank accounts, who have been tasked with distributing this and continue their good work in providing grants to local causes. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Wallenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to the Treasury Minister for answering that. Given the extensive and important work charities undertake on our island, is he committed to supporting them for the future? And specifically, does he have the information, has the Island Man Food Bank been supported by the Manx Lottery Trust? Thank you.
Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. I'll certainly give the commitment to government's ongoing work with the third sector, and certainly we rely on the third sector and promote the third sector to support the people of this island, particularly at the current stage. In terms of his question regarding the Manx Lottery Trust and whether they've given money directly to the food bank, unfortunately I don't have that information. Thank you.
To question 7, I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mrs. Maltby.
Thank you. In the absence of my honourable friend, Mr Thomas, I'd like to ask a member of infrastructure whether tram track warning signage is being installed on Douglas Promenade, and if not, what assessment was completed to deem it unnecessary?
Now, in the absence of the Infrastructure Minister, Member of the Department, Mr. Glover, will answer. Thank you.
Durham Idle Order. Warning signs along Douglas Promenade comply with the statutory guidance, and the Manx Highway Code gives advice to road users in relation to riding near or across tracks, and that's Rule 306, which I can helpfully explain. This states that all road users, but particularly pedal cyclists and motorcyclists, should take extra care when driving or riding close to or crossing the tracks, especially if the rails are wet. You should take particular care when crossing the rails at shallow angles. It is safer to cross more directly. Notwithstanding that, Highways is considering the introduction of a non-standard warning sign that might further assist road users in hazard awareness of the hoist tram lines.
Supplementary question, Mrs. Maltby.
Can the member of infrastructure share if any accidents have been reported to the DOI from members of the public in regard to the tram tracks in specific?
Mr Glover.
Gurumaya Lauder. Since the start of this year, one accident has been recorded by the police. An objective of the project was to reduce the number of accidents, and though it is early days, the preliminary data suggests the number of accidents has reduced.
Supplementary question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Would the member of the Department agree, after reeling off all of the detailed guidance, that actually at a time when the Department for Enterprise is hoping to radically increase the number of visitors to our island, that we don't just need to cater for those of us who live on the island and know about these potential dangers, but that warning signs would be quite commonsensical in relation to those who may be visiting our island?
Mr Glover to reply.
Gurumaya Lauder, I agree with Mr Ashford. The presence of the tram tracks, though, has been highlighted by the use of the red-coloured tram corridor, and previously there was no delineation of that tram corridor. But yes, highways are considering a non-standard warning sign as well to assist both locals and visitors.
Turn to question 8. I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas South, Mrs Maltby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the member for infrastructure what consideration he has given to the installation of adaptive changing place within the sea terminal, including a ceiling hoist.
Now, again, call on Mr Glover to reply.
Gurumaya Lauder. At the time the sea terminal public toilets were remodelled and refurbished in 2016, no consideration was given to the installation of an adaptive changing place with a ceiling hoist. The works that were undertaken at this time comprised of creating 2 new disabled toilets to comply with document M of the building regulations. This is a standard layout for disabled toilet facilities, but it is recognised that this does not meet all potential users' needs.
Supplementary question, Mrs Maltby.
Can the member of infrastructure give any indication as to if the department will be likely to be making an application to develop the toileting facilities available at the sea terminal, and what level of priority it might be given?
Mr Glover.
Gurumaya Lauder. I would suggest to the honourable member that she has a word with the current Minister of Infrastructure, who, when this previously came up in, as a question, supported Mrs Maltby in raising the issue. I think the one that there is in existence, if my memory is correct from the answer to that question, is at the Manx Museum, and that was funded actually by charity money. So maybe have a word with the new Minister.
Turn to question 9. Again, call on the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to ask a member for the Department for Infrastructure what plans he has to make bus stops and buses more accessible for people with disabilities.
Again, turn to Mr Glover, Member of the Department of Infrastructure, to reply.
Gurumaya Lauder. I'm going to have to get them to make this writing bigger. A limited programme of works has been undertaken in the Isle of Man to make bus stops accessible. With over 900 bus stops on the island, approximately 80 bus stops have had that remedial work to improve accessibility. To identify the level of accessibility of each stop, an audit is required, following which a targeted remedial programme can then be identified. In addition to level boarding, full accessibility is dependent upon other features of the bus stop, including sufficient width of the footway, minimum is 2 metres, ideally 2.7 metres, to provide space for the ramp to be dropped, the provision of a footway surfacing, absence of pavement obstructions and dropped curbs. Whilst a number of stops have been made accessible in response to individual requests, the priority of the work undertaken to date has been to those stops that have been made accessible as part of highways maintenance programming. I actually counted on my journey in the number coming on non-bus routes and on the main road into Douglas from the south, and there's one in Ballabeg and 16 on the main road from Ballasalla through to the top to coming off Richmond Hill. And all the ones on the prom have been done as well. £150,000 has been allocated in the budget of the department to undertake accessibility improvement works on the highways, and it's estimated that the remediation work required for each stop will be in the region of £10,000. This would enable remedial works to be undertaken on approximately 15 more bus stops. With regards to accessibility of buses, the Department is committed to ensuring safe accessibility to the bus service for its passengers. It provides seating with extra legroom to accommodate for passengers with arthritis and ensures that the placement of handrails, important for passengers with mobility or balance issues, is in accordance with the recommended best practice.
I recommend to home of 14. It's the font of all knowledge. First supplementary question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On a quick bit of maths there, I mean, I believe in ongoing capital projects and maintenance, but at £150,000 and 15 stops, we'll all be long gone in this honourable court by the time the Department for Infrastructure has completed all of the stops. Can I ask the member for the Department, UK bus stops are set at a level that allows level boarding, and I think it's about 180 millimetres. There was actually a commitment given in another place on the 20th of April 2021 that the Department budget for improvement works had been increased and the plan was to improve 50 stops a year. So I was going to ask, is this still the case? But the Honourable Member's just quoted 15 stops. Now, by my maths, there's quite a difference between that. So what's changed since the commitment on the 20th of April 2021?
Mr Glover to reply.
Guru Mayad Lord, I am unaware of what has changed is my honest answer to that. The Department has given me the 15 as the figure that is planned. Maybe a reduced budget is in place for this, but I will go away and make those representations to the Department and try and get an answer for the Honourable Member.
Supplementary question, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the political member for his response this morning. He mentions that there's an audit of bus stops, but no mention of introducing potentially new bus stops. I know in my own constituency in Onken, Site Matters have been requesting a bus stop outside their facility for several years. Can the member take it away and have a look at that and potentially look at introducing new bus stops where they feel they are appropriate? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr Glover to reply.
Guru Mayad Lord, there is an accessibility steering group that's been established in compliance with the commitment made in Tynwald in April 2021 to adopt a UK Confederation passenger transport voluntary code for the use and acceptance of mobility scooters on low floors. The current list, there is a priority stops list identified as well. That's been agreed between bus, van and highway services, but this may change following consideration of the recommendation from the steering group, and I will take away the comments the Honourable Member has made.
Supplementary, Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Honourable Member has just referred to the steering group that was created in October 2021. And it sounds like no recommendations have yet come forward. We're now 8 to 9 months since that group was established. Can the Honourable Member give some indication of when recommendations are expected? Because in February, again, I think in another place, the former Minister said, and I quote, "These recommendations will be forthcoming in the very near future." Well, we're 4 months on from that. Can I ask what near future means in DOI terms?
Mr Glover to reply.
Guru Mayad Lord, I think you'll find as well that the current Minister, the new Minister for Infrastructure, has been very vocal on the subject as a backbencher, so I would expect the near future to be very near.
Supplementary, Mr Collister.
And thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank again the member for his response this morning. In the original question, it talks about accessibility for disabilities on the island to gain bus stops. Is there any legislation or guidance in respect of how far a bus stop should be from a designated charity that should have access to the bus service?
Mr Glover to reply.
Guru Mayad Lord, I don't have that information with me, but again I will try and find out an answer.
Final supplementary, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and 2 questions in one, if I may. When is it expected that the voluntary code of best practice will be in place? And the Honourable Member, in reply to my previous question, mentioned the commitments that and the drive from the new Minister, which I do look forward to speedy response, because the new Minister has raised it on numerous occasions, both in this House and another place. But he used the phrase very near. I've been in this place long enough, Mr Speaker, to know that very near can sometimes mean in the life of the next administration. So can I actually ask, when we say very near, are we talking 12 months, 18 months, 5 years, our lifetime?
Mr Glover to reply.
Guru Lord, I will take that up with the new minister. I can say that 2 bus vanning users with a disability have recently been appointed to the committee with the intention that we embrace the principle of participation motto that has been used by people with disabilities, nothing about us without us. The committee will be reporting to the Minister in due course with their recommendations. It's all I can give, I'm afraid, due course. With their recommendations on the acceptance of mobility scooters on bus vanning services, and it is intended that the committee will also consider and make recommendations on other broader transport and travel accessibility issues.
Question 10. I call the Honourable Member for Garth, Mrs Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for the Cabinet Office how many offers were made to accommodate refugees from Ukraine. How many refugees have been placed, A, on the family route, and B, in non-family households, and if she will make a statement?
For the Minister for the Cabinet Office to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for her question. The Isle of Man Homes for Ukraine scheme was set up to ensure that any Ukrainians who may choose to come to the island are welcomed into a hosting arrangement that is safe, appropriate and dignified. Since the scheme was launched on the 18th of March 2022, 307 offers have been made to the Ukraine support team to accommodate Ukrainians. As of today, a total of 63 Ukrainians have been given leave to come to our island. They have been able to apply through the Isle of Man Ukraine Family Scheme or the Isle of Man Ukraine Sponsorship Scheme. Of the 63, 19 have been given leave to arrive through the family pathways. It is impossible to know definitively how many of the 19 have actually arrived on the island because those coming through the family scheme are not obliged to go through the corresponding safe host checking process. Nevertheless, our contact with the community confirm that close to that number have arrived. Under the sponsorship pathways, 44 people have been given leave to come to the island. All 44 have been sponsored and have accommodation provided by local residents. 3 Ukrainians who initially arrived via the family pathway visa route have since moved to accommodation provided by local safe hosts. This was facilitated by the Ukraine support team. So, the 47 who therefore now sit under our Isle of Man Homes for Ukraine scheme are in accommodation provided by 19 safe hosts. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has already enabled 63 Ukrainians to seek safe haven on our island. Thank you to the generous hosts and thank you to those officers from across government, the police and other agencies and the third sector working to undertake the crucial safeguarding and accommodation checks and the other important support to ensure a safe and dignified support system for those fleeing the war in Ukraine.
So, front of question, Mrs Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer and the detail given. Could she further clarify whether the number of children remains at 14 or if there's any increase? And also, in terms of the 307 offers of support, what communication has there been to the people who made those offers? Because we see every day on our television news the extreme numbers of people requiring assistance and wanting to leave Ukraine. So what's the blockage in terms of enabling more people to take up the offers to come to a safe haven on the Isle of Man?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In terms of how many Ukrainians here are adults and how many are children, those that are provided with accommodation via a safe host under the Isle of Man Homes for Ukraine scheme includes 27 adults and 20 children. The honourable questioner, I think, is also getting to the point about how greater connections or how that offer could be put out further to people wishing to welcome Ukrainians into their home and to support in that way. I think the ongoing issue is that the Isle of Man government does not have a list of Ukrainians waiting to come to the island, and it's quite clear in all communications to those who sign up for the Safe Host scheme that it's not a role that the Isle of Man government is able to play in terms of facilitating those connections. We have explored various options, and I do still raise with officers if they're able to sort of research into further other sort of ways to connect, if you like. But in the end, at the moment, these connections do rely on those individual connections between a potential host who would have to initiate a visa application process, and also, importantly, for people to, first of all, know about and want to come to the island. And in that endeavour, there have been ongoing conversations since March with third sector on island and off island, UNHCR, the Irish-British, the British Red Cross in Ireland, embassies in the United Kingdom, and also different community and even church groups to see if there is a way to sort of facilitate these connections. But as it stands at the moment, anybody who signs up or put themselves forward for this is aware that we cannot facilitate and initiate those that matching services, if you like. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the growth of the Ukrainian community, it's got to be welcome, but in terms of a mechanism being in place, is there anything to enable these people to actually communicate within the island and to share experiences and help them to go forward? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a very active Ukrainian community. They are providing support. Charities are stepping up. Things like Cafe Lingo. Having met people who've come here and seen them in a room with officers who are providing government support and the third sector, which would include charities, community groups, One World Centre. You can see that is happening. So, part of the gratitude and the credit on that front has to be given to those people that are assisting out there in the community. And I think that is right, and it's much better to happen in that way, informally, in a supportive way, rather than government seeking to facilitate everything. For example, one of the things that was introduced is that when people are expected to arrive on island, a point of contact from people from Ukraine who already live here to say, look, if you need us, we are here. Because there's different ways that people need to communicate, and they may not always want to communicate or ask for support from a government official. They may obviously want to talk to somebody from their own culture, community and language. And so that's the way that this has been working quietly in the background. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further supplementary, Mrs. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard from both Isle of Man would-be hosts who are disappointed that their offers to accommodate Ukraine families have not proved successful. And I've also heard from an Isle of Man host who said it took hours and hours and hours of weeks of work in order to make contact herself through various Facebook and people working on the ground in the northwest. Is there more that the Isle of Man government could do to put people to share those links with people who have the accommodation when we know there are so many millions of refugees looking for safe haven? And the other point on the island, I hear from the sponsoring family that without exception, Isle of Man government support, grant aid, establishing a bank account, the school support for the young child has all been exemplary and very efficient and supportive. But perhaps the biggest blockage to the family settling in the Isle of Man is the lack of English spoken by the parents. And would the government be doing or consider doing any more to increase the language availability to enable the people who do settle here to be able to get jobs at the level of which they're educated to do, and who've left, in many cases, excellent jobs in order to find safe haven here? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll just deal, I think, with the point about language, the final point. First of all, your part of the support that's been given has been to support Cafe Lingo, with some IT support and also connections in there to promote the language and try and assist with that barrier. I think it's also the case that different community groups may be meeting just to kind of have informal discussions. I think language is one of those things where it's built out and learnt through practice and through doing and to integrating in the community in that way. The expectation has not been set out at all that the Isle of Man government Homes for Ukraine scheme is able to provide people with a direct link to Ukrainians who want to come here. I absolutely 100% get the frustration, but it's not the case here. The Ukraine support team is not linking hosts and guests. We don't have a way to promote that into people who want to come here, notwithstanding effort. So prospective hosts are though, they're asked to use to try and establish channels that they can trust, such as reputable community and voluntary groups. And the Ukraine support team have been working to investigate the possibility of Manx hosts being able to sign up to linking services such as Reset, which is a charity in the UK. We can try and be hopeful that this might be established with a positive outcome. However, some of these established UK charities are effectively linking in to the UK Homes for Ukraine scheme. So whilst we can keep looking and trying to establish links, I think the important thing is that people really need to get comfortable with that themselves. In the end, this is about people welcoming those into their homes. And so I think that where there might be other ways to facilitate connections, it's not necessarily which is at the fingertips of government at this time. I think there was a third point, but I can't remember it. I'll have to give way to the honourable questioner. Is that okay?
Final supplementary, and during that, could Mrs. King might remind you of anything that you haven't picked up?
No, I thank the Minister for her honest answers this morning, and I do sense the real will amongst government as well as the community to support Ukrainians who are on the island. I suppose I just one last question in terms of the longer term. If that we have 63 Ukrainians coming to live on the Isle of Man already, the initial sponsorship route was for a 6-month accommodation in people's homes. What to the long term? The chilling words I hear that governments hope that the war in Ukraine will be over by the end of the year. What if it isn't? And what is the government and the community thoughts towards accommodating Ukrainians longer term and perhaps increasing the numbers that come here? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable questioner makes a very valid point. This isn't going away anytime soon. The Ukraine Support Advisory Group, which is the political set-up that has been developing these matters out and bringing forward the initiatives, will absolutely be keeping all this under review. I think that we will be getting to a point in the next sort of few weeks and months that now, we've gone from a standing start, having nothing, never having done this on the island before, to being able to say, look, we've welcomed people, getting feedback, tweaking this as we've gone along. So I can give that assurance that we will look at what might happen next. In terms of the 6 months, I would expect that this is looking to be an ongoing conflict, and there should likely be a chance for people to sort of regularise their immigration position on the Isle of Man, but it will be reviewed, as will be the other elements that the honourable member has mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question 11. Return to the honourable member for Arbicast Hamley, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture when the supply register was last updated.
The Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's get the right answer, haven't we? Apologies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last check of supply register was carried out at the end of the summer term in 2021. Supply teachers can make themselves active or inactive on the supply system at any time. OHR carry out a termly check to identify those who haven't worked in the previous 12 months and make them inactive. However, this has been paused recently due to the Department's request for more supply teachers. In December 2021, the Department requested that a media release was issued to ask for any qualified teachers who are currently not already on the supply list to register. Thank you.
On to question, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. In terms of the current consultation, it appears to have one clear aim of actually getting more information about the individuals involved. Is it also being used to encourage people to go into being a supply teacher? Is that additional data being collected? With regard to that call for teachers to fill up the survey, how many teachers are actually contacted to make them aware of this consultation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The survey referred to was sent to all active supply teachers on the 24th of May. The current number of active supply teachers is 342. The survey remains open until the 8th of July, and data will be reviewed at this point.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. In terms of the reasoning behind this consultation, is there something specific? It's quite a brief survey. It's only covering, I think, 5 questions, and it's very individually based. Is this a one-off, or is it seen as one of a series? And have there been previous surveys that collected similar information? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
reply.
Thank you, Mr President. There's never been a survey of our supply teachers previously. This is the first one. We obviously have a rolling advert for supply teachers, trying to encourage, and that's open throughout the year. The survey did not ask any questions specifically relating to supply for this September. However, there was a question asking if supply teachers would have any interest in teaching supply in the future.
Final supplementary, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. In terms of the survey, there's still another week to respond to it, so hopefully we've given it an extra boost. In terms of respondents, are you happy with the number of respondents received? Presumably you would be sending it out to several hundred people. Is that reflected in the number of updates that are coming through? And will a further email reminder be sent out to those people who got the email advice on the 24th of May that this was happening? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was going to say Mr President then. Certainly I'm happy to put another email out to the individuals, and obviously we will review this once all the data's back in following the closure of the survey on the 8th of July.
Question 12, and I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture when she expects to bring before the branches a revised education bill.
On the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In relation to proposed primary legislation for the future, the Department is currently in the process of reviewing its existing primary legislation and consulting with the Attorney-General's chambers in order to modernise the island's education legislation and bring it up to date. Since education legislation affects such a wide range of stakeholders across the island, nearly all of us are affected in some way by this, whether it's pupils, parents, teachers or employers, to name a few. But the Department will put time into a thorough and effective consultation process on the principles of the proposed primary legislation. It is envisaged this will take place later this year. We are taking best practice and lessons learned in order to ensure members of the public are able to gain a clear picture of what this legislation will mean for them through this collaborative approach. It's envisaged that any legislation introduced in the future will be developed with our key stakeholders. Its aim will be to achieve a common vision for education, include agreed policies and ensure it is fit for purpose and address any of the issues. As we want to address some of the more urgent issues, the Department proposes to introduce 2 amendment bills. The first, which will be introduced into the branches in 2023, will address the additional educational needs, an education tribunal and emergency closures of schools. The second amendment bill, which is hoped will be introduced in 2024, will cover quality assurance, governance, catchment areas and include a general tidy-up of existing sections in need of modernisation, such as the curriculum. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's just the one supplementary question. It's been nearly 18 months now since the last bill was pulled from the branches, and while the Honourable Minister refers to future consultation, can I ask what consultation has taken place with teachers, parents and unions on any future bill since the previous bill was withdrawn in February last year? One of the criticisms at the time, whether founded or not, was that there hadn't been enough consultation. So while we speak about future consultation, can I ask, has anything actually physically happened in terms of consultation over what is now nearly 18 months since the last bill was withdrawn?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. As I've stated in the answer, obviously we're going to push forward with these 2 amendment bills, and you know, I'm happy to say we will consult on them with regards to that. As consultation on the previous bill, no, that hasn't taken place, and until we decide whether we are going with a new bill, the key important factors that need to be addressed urgently are the 2 amendment bills that are coming forward.
Question, Mr Scorlett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I just ask the Minister why the Department is relying on amending current legislation rather than drafting a new education bill?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. As these are key issues and we want to get them into the branches as soon as possible, clearly we're all aware of the additional educational needs challenges that we have. It was seen as the best way to get legislation into the branches as quick as possible to try and rectify the most urgent needs that were identified in the Beeman's report.
Just one supplementary, but presumably the second part, Mr Ashford.
In typical politician style, Mr Speaker, I changed my mind once I heard the answer, because to cut the answer short, it seemed to be down to one word of none. Would the Minister accept that actually, although there's not a bill to consult on, the provision within education and how we move our education system forward is something that should be constantly being consulted on now before any bill is formulated or brought forward. Because again, whether the criticism was correct or not, one of the criticisms at the time was it said the bill was brought forward and then the consultation, and people hadn't had the input at the right point. So can I ask the Minister, is there plans on the general principles around education to go out and consult with teachers, parents, unions before any bill is actually formulated to be brought forward for consultation?
Minister to reply.
Yes. As one of the biggest critics of the previous bill that came forward, I certainly would commit to that. And it's the most important thing is to make sure you've got all stakeholders on board in the hopes that when it comes into the branches that we can get it through smoothly and get a result at the end of it.
Question 13, calling the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to ask the Minister for Enterprise how many licences to grow industrial hemp have been issued to date, and what plans his department has to review the licensing regime and encourage sectorial growth.
Calling the Minister for Enterprise, Dr Allinson, to reply. No! Mr Crookall, my apologies. Oh, you go away for 2 weeks and everything changes. My
honourable colleague, please.
My sincere apologies, Mr Crookall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following approval of the misuse of drugs, brackets cannabis licences, brackets data processing regulations 2022 in Tynwald last week, I can confirm that as a result, the Gambling Supervision Commission has now issued their first licence approval in principle letter for the cultivation of medicinal cannabis. I am hoping that this will send out a positive message to the market and generate the confidence required to attract further high-quality cannabinoid businesses to the island and to make further licence applications which will secure the long-term inward investment required to actively develop this sector. Developing a regulated medicinal cannabis sector for export is a key priority for the Department, and our current economic development objectives are to secure 10 licences by 2025, supporting the potential generation of 250 new jobs within the island economy. The original objective of the Misuse of Drugs Cannabis Regulations 2020, approved by Tynwald in January 2021, was to support a best-in-class, differentiated medicinal cannabis sector on the island, offering business investors a clear set of multiple licence options with transparency of the conditions required for their approval. The licence options available include licences for high THC grade medicinal cannabis, as well as a licence for low THC industrial hemp utilising feminised plants only. In the UK and Europe, male industrial hemp is grown in thousands of acres for fibre and bioplastics, but in the UK, the flower leaf and bud must be destroyed to prevent extraction of cannabinoids. Our initial regime, under advice, determined that the use of male plants would be prohibited due to the risk of cross-pollination, and in doing so would protect the higher quality and more economically attractive propositions surrounding the feminised plants. Consequently, it was never our intention to replicate the UK regime for large-scale industrial hemp for manufacturing purposes. But now that we have established the regime and the first licence approval in principle letter has been issued, in line with the core proposition developed, I do think that this is an opportune moment to review the broader proposition once again, especially with regard to industrial hemp, whilst ensuring we do not undermine the core proposition that has been established, and we will be reviewing this together with the GSC over the coming months. For now, though, we will continue to focus our support for the development of a high-value THC indoor cultivation-based medicinal cannabis sector for export, which is where the significant economic opportunity was originally identified. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Minister, and there's much positive in that, many positives within that statement, how many licences are there currently in the application process? Because obviously I appreciate it's taken 18 months to get where we are now with the issue of the one licence. And what is the estimated timescales now for the issuing of licence from application to issuance?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I don't have that information, but I'll be more than happy to put that to answer members afterwards, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr Glover.
Guru, my Lord. The Minister mentioned best in class there. Does he think we have best in class, bearing in mind the Memorandum of Understanding part of the Home Affairs in the UK? That's not differentiating us at all, in my view.
Minister to reply.
I believe, Mr Speaker, we are right at the beginning of this industry here on the island, and I believe we absolutely have the potential here to be best in class at what we plan to do.
The supplementary, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask what external expertise has the department sought to engage with to help encouraging sectoral growth? This is quite a complicated area. And can the Minister confirm if they have engaged any consultants or professional advice in this area? And also, as part of his review, Mr Speaker, can I ask, will the Minister be looking to see if there's any overarching criteria that may be getting in the way of us being best in class? So, for instance, can I ask the Minister, is there any limits on the destination countries, for instance, that licence holders can export to?
Minister to reply.
Again, Mr Speaker, a lot of that is information I certainly don't have, but I'm more than happy to supply that. As regards to the best in class, I don't see any reason why into the future we shouldn't be the best in class, and certainly alongside the others. And I do thank those that have given us information and helped us along the way during this consultation, in particular the UK Home Office. Thank you.
Final supplementary, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In his initial answer, the Minister referred to the farming community and the limits that are placed around that. Can I ask the Minister, in terms of sectoral growth, industrial hemp now is being used in a multitude of things, including building projects and all sorts, which he did allude to in his answer. Can I ask what support is in place within the department for farmers who may wish to diversify? And has the Minister looked at the potential cost of the licences for those farmers, which in some cases could be prohibitive?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There have been conversations had with farmers on the island here, and they will obviously progress in the future as and when we decide to progress. If we progress with the industrial hemp, go down the industrial hemp route, the cost of those licences at the moment, I don't know what they are, but I'm certain they won't be too excessive for anybody that we want to help get into the market.
Question 14, calling the Honourable Member for Garth, Mrs Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Member for Environment, Food and Agriculture if she is content with the current policy over green lanes and greenway road access, what assessment her department has made over damage caused to ecosystems and habitats around green lanes and the uplands by motor vehicles, and if she will make a statement.
Now, in the absence of the Minister for Environment, Food and Agriculture, I call on Member of the Department, Dr Hayward, to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member from Garth for her question, and I'm pleased to be able to answer this question on behalf of the Minister. Access to the island's green lanes and greenway roads, be it on foot, horseback, riding or driving, is a public right governed by the highways legislation, which is managed by the Department of Infrastructure. And I'm aware, of course, that there was a question posed to that department last week. From the perspective of the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture, as long as people use these routes, the green lanes and greenway roads, responsibly and stay within the law, we're content with the current policy. In fact, we would positively encourage their ongoing use for recreational activity, since the focus on those formal routes helps us to protect wider habitats. Officers in DEFA tend to assess damage caused by vehicles either when it's discovered as part of their daily duties or following reports from our tenants and the public, but this tends to be reactionary in nature after an incident of a vehicle straying from a greenway. Damage to habitat and ecosystems in relation to green lanes and the uplands can be broken down into three distinct categories. Firstly, direct vehicular damage to legal routes such as erosion and subsequent washout, often associated with unsurfaced tracks. Secondly, braiding, where numerous routes develop parallel to the legal route, often associated with users looking for alternative routes to avoid deep ruts and pools. And thirdly, intentional and illegal off-piste riding and driving in open hill land and within plantations. Where significant issues arise within the constraints of the legal routes, these are highlighted by officers and other key stakeholders at the Countryside Access Group meetings, which is chaired by the Department of Infrastructure. Officers in DEFA work proactively with other colleagues to minimise incidents that could lead to damage occurring, both in terms of policing the uplands and then liaising with interest groups and influencing and supporting decisions around areas and ties that would be unsuitable for motorised access. Where braiding and parallel tracking occurs, the department officers look to install deflector fencing at right angles to the legal route to deter and prevent further damage occurring and to provide time for the ground to recover. The frequency of these deflector fences ensures that users remain on the legal route, and I'm happy to report that the damage caused by parallel tracking has been reduced significantly, and this is particularly apparent when we view recent aerial photography. Thank you.
Before I call on Mrs Kane to try a supplementary question, that does complete the hour available for questions. So, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I propose that we suspend Standing Order 3.5.12 brackets 2 for the remaining all questions to be taken? But in doing so, Mr Speaker, can I suggest we finish this question, then move on to the third reading of the Manx Care? Sorry, not Manx Care Bill. Going back in time there. The Capacity Bill, and then go back to oral questions.
Thank you, second.
Thank you, Mrs Kane. So the proposal we have is to complete question 14, then complete the legislative business, and then return to questions. That's my understanding of what you proposed, Mr Ashford?
Correct, Mr Speaker.
Just so that the House is in no confusion. In which case, I will put that question, of course, it's not a requirement of standing orders, it's a simple, straight majority that's required for that these days. So, putting the question that we complete question 14 and then move to the legislative programme and then return to questions. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Turning then to complete question 14, call on Mrs Kane for a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her detailed answer. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of points. She may be aware of some of the public comment following the first question last week and members' experiences that were recounted in another place. The key point I thought she said was that DEFA thought it would positively encourage the activity as long as people were responsible and stayed on the existing routes. Just given the numbers, and now I'm hearing increasing numbers of visiting groups of bikes coming, is she convinced they are acting responsibly and staying on the routes? Is she confident that the signage directing them to those routes is adequate? Because one of the complaints I'm getting is perhaps the signage is lacking in this regard. But also, given that practice grounds such as around Snuff the Wind and others have been restricted, is there now too much demand on particular areas? And would the department feel that further areas of signed trails could be opened up to enable people to enjoy off-road riding safely and responsibly? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Dr Hayward to reply.
Thank you. The Department annually supports and sanctions over 300 organised events across the estate, including motorbike and mountain bike events, and each event application is assessed individually. So we are actively encouraging people to be out there and using these pathways. Since 2016, the Department has prosecuted 7 people who've illegally accessed Department land with motorised vehicles, and this includes illegal access at the Airs. However, we recognise and support the value and the importance of the estate as a recreational facility for all, including motorsport events and motorsport access. The Department has considered providing a suitable permanent area for motorsport activity. However, the amount of available land that's suitable for such an activity is very limited, and we continue to evaluate the options as they're becoming known. It may be useful to note that if a suitable site could be proposed and approved, it would need to be externally administered and managed by a third party. But it would seem most appropriate the work in this area might come as a partnership between perhaps the ACU and the Department for Enterprise under their sporting responsibilities. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mrs Kane.
Thank you, and I thank the member for that answer. I suppose the clash between walkers in some areas of the island that I've been getting sent photographs of, Ballacob, Ballacurn, part of the Claren Road, and the constant times perhaps when there's repeated people going down them, there is damage to those hill lands and those routes. What programme of repairs is the department carrying out, or would that be the DOI? And is the department content that there is adequate repair work undertaken on these routes to maintain them to a standard that facilitates both walkers and motorcyclists, but also any other users of the countryside? Thank you.
Hayward.
Thank you. The Green Lane repair, that's... the officer's just typed a DFE responsibility. That's a bit of a... I think he means DOI responsibility. We do help with the deflector fencing and stuff like that from the DEFA perspective, because we're obviously going around doing things like some of the footpath posts and signage as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, That concludes question 14. So in line with that House's decision, we'll pause question time there. We will move to item 2 on our order paper, bills for first reading, and I call on the Deputy Secretary of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 3 bills for first reading today. The Animal Welfare Bill 2022 in the hands of Dr Hayward, the Energy Bill 2022 in the hands of Mrs Barber, and the Trust and Trustees Bill 2022 in the hands of Dr Allinson.
Thank you. Turn to item 3 and bills for third reading, Capacity Bill, and I call on the Honourable Member for Ramsden, Mr Hooper, to move.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Honourable Members, this bill is an important step forward for the island, with the benefits that it will bring to our community will be significant. It places, Honourable Members, the core principles of mental capacity on a statutory footing, and by doing so provides important safeguards for some of the most vulnerable members of our society. The core principles of this bill will re-centre the person who lacks capacity and re-emphasise their dignity and right to self-determination. As a starting point, a person must always be assumed to have capacity to make the decision in question, and evidence is required to establish that they do not. Additionally, everything must be done to support them in making their decision, such as providing information in formats which are more accessible for them. By establishing these principles, the bill will protect people's rights to make decisions for themselves where they can. In the event that a decision has to be made on behalf of a person, the decision maker must take into account the person's best interests. The bill makes it clear that best interests include the person's social and cultural interests and beliefs, and is not limited to medical factors. Further measures introduced by the bill will enable people to plan ahead by making lasting powers of attorney and advance decisions to refuse treatment. By putting these documents in place, people will be able to provide instructions about their future arrangements and ensure that any decisions made are in line with their views. Mr Speaker, I am pleased to move the third reading of this bill, a bill which will have such a positive impact for our island community. I would like to thank colleagues both within and outside the Chamber for the work they have done over the years in bringing this important piece of legislation forward. In particular, I'd like to thank Mr Ashford and Mr Thomas for their insight and helpful comments at the consideration of the bill's clauses earlier this month. On that note, I can update the House that the particular query raised by Mr Thomas in respect of the transfer of functions of the Attorney-General's chambers under clause 25(6) is being looked into and will be addressed, if necessary, by the Legislative Council. Mr Speaker, I beg to move that the Capacity Bill 2022 be read for a third time.
Dr Hayward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I beg to second reserved remarks.
Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'd just like to very briefly take the opportunity to congratulate the Minister for getting the bill over the line here in the Honourable House. This has been something that has been a long time in the making. I went back in Hansard to see how long this had been spoken about and lost the will to live after I got back to about 2008. So I think we're a lot further back than that. This, as the Minister says, will have a massive impact on people's lives. It will make a real difference. And it will also make a real difference, not for those just impacted, but also the families of those impacted as well. It was something that always seemed to end up being stuck in treacle in the department. So I congratulate both the department, the Honourable Member and everyone involved in bringing this forward, that they've got today. It is one of the most welcome pieces of legislation that this House has considered for quite a long time.
On the move to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I don't have anything to add to what Mr Ashford has just said. I think this is long overdue and we are definitely about getting things done. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I beg to move.
Put the question that the Capacity Bill be read for a third time. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Now, returning to the question paper and question 15, I call on the Honourable Member for Arbroath Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care what the average number of registered foster carers was in each of the last 5 years. Thank you.
Call the Minister for Health and Social Care, Mr Hooper, to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Foster carers can be broken down into two very broad categories. Mainstream carers, who are individuals from the community who have applied for, been assessed and approved as foster carers. Or family and friends carers. These are family members or persons known to the family who have put themselves forward to be assessed to look after a particular child. These children will be known to the applicants, unlike with mainstream carers. The average numbers over the last 5 years are as follows, starting with mainstream carers between 2018 and 2022 in chronological order: 36, 39, 37, 33 and 29. For friends and family carers, again 2018 to 2022 in chronological order, 8, 6, 9, 12 and 7, which means the total average for each of those 5 years in chronological order will be 44, 45, 46, 45 and 36. As the honourable members will no doubt have noticed, the number of mainstream carers has decreased since 2018 from 36 to 29. This is due to a number of variables such as resignations, carers adopting a child, deregistration by the department or carers becoming special guardians. There is also a hold on recruitment of new carers for the previous 4 years. This is no longer the case, and there are currently a small number of new carers in the assessment process. The department acknowledges there is currently a shortage of foster carers for all ages of children, and the service are looking to get to a place of having a minimum of 5 additional fostering households per year over the next 3 years. The Family Placement Service are also currently working with the communications team regarding the recruitment of foster carers. All the team information has been updated on the government website. There are plans to move forward and launch events across the island to let people know there is still a need for carers. Manx Care also organise events on a regular basis and open evenings for potential foster carers. So far there have been 2 events this year, and there is also the option for one-to-one information sessions to take place to avoid any delay if a member of the public wishes to submit an application to start the foster caring process. If anybody is interested in becoming a foster carer or wants to find out more about what is involved, details can be found on the government website or by calling the Family Placement Service on 610 000 to get some initial advice.
Supplementary question, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for such a constructive and positive answer in that advert there, which is really, really valuable. How successful has the department been at attracting and retaining foster carers? I recognise it's a challenging job to take on, and it's something that people really want to get into, but they're often seen as barriers. How does the department break down those barriers and reassure people who've actually got the skills required to do this? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think I covered that in my original answer. The department, rather via Manx Care now, will run these events quite regularly. There is very rarely a delay in organising these events. They will offer one-to-one sessions with individuals, and like I say, the Family Placement Service are very happy to discuss with anybody, even the honourable member, if he wishes to become a foster carer himself. They'd be more than happy to provide all that information to him on a very, very personal basis.
Supplementary question, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that offer. In terms of the impact of COVID, has that had a lasting issue, or is it something that's now being dealt with in terms of this provision? There does potentially appear to be a link in terms of the COVID challenge and the peak in support being offered to the job we more recently experienced. Is that something that has been considered? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd suggest that there's no doubt that COVID will have had an impact on people's ability, perhaps, rather than their willingness to act as a foster carer. But I've got no specific information as to the impact of COVID. I think, as can be seen from the fact there has been a recruitment freeze for 4 years, and that actually goes prior to COVID as well. So I would hesitate to suggest that the recent decrease in foster carers is directly as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. I think it is due to broader issues.
Final supplementary, Mr. Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. I recognise that most people who do this valuable role don't do it for financial reasons, but at the moment there are a real challenging economic situation out there. And in terms of the department, have you actually looked at the support that's available, and is it seen as adequate given these rising costs and the need of these people to really provide the perfect environment they can for these young people? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Foster carer payments are designed to contribute towards costs incurred. They're not supposed to be provided as a supplementary employment income for carers. However, there have been some changes already. So in May this year, the mileage payments were increased from 50p to 57p per mile, in line with new regulations set by Treasury. As the honourable member is no doubt aware, there is a working group ongoing, led by the Cabinet Office, in respect of looking at the effects of inflationary pressures on cost of living across the island, and the DHSC are feeding into that in respect of foster carers, into that wider government consideration.
Question 16, I call the honourable member for Douglas North, Mr. Ashford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care what plans there are to bring forward legislation similar to the Down Syndrome Act 2022 of the UK Parliament.
On the Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Down Syndrome Act 2022 is an Act of Parliament that has recently received royal assent and extends to England and Wales. The Act places a new duty on the Secretary of State to issue guidance to relevant authorities on how to meet the specific needs of people with Down syndrome, and for relevant authorities to have due regard to that guidance when providing services. Honourable members will see from the list of legislation that is set out in the Island Plan, there is currently no plans to introduce a specific Down syndrome bill in the Isle of Man. There is, however, a Safeguarding Vulnerable Adults Bill due for introduction into the branches during 2024-2025. Policy work for this has not yet started, and so I can't commit to at this juncture to adding a specific provision in relation to Down syndrome. The Department is more than happy to fully consider the options when work on this bill commences and the impact of the English legislation is better understood.
Supplementary question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and it is perfectly understandable that it wouldn't have formed part of the Ireland Plan because, in fact, it was a private member's bill in the UK Parliament and it was only just in the formulation stage at the point when the Ireland Plan was drawn up. Would the Minister agree with me that the life outcomes for those with Down syndrome has changed dramatically over the last 60 or so years? For instance, in the 1960s, the life expectancy for someone with Down syndromes was about 13 years. In the early 1980s, it was 30 years, and today it is actually 58 years. So this will be the first generation of people with Down syndrome that may well outlive their parents. And so it is crucial that there is proper support and statutory support in place for those individuals. Would the Minister agree with me in that regard?
Minister Chaplock.
Yes, I would agree that it's absolutely essential that proper support is provided. Whether that needs to be enshrined in the way the UK have done it by a bill that requires statutory guidance to be issued may not be appropriate for the Isle of Man, for example. Many of these functions could be included, for example, in the Manx care mandate. No need to go through the legislative process. We could simply include specific requirements in the mandate. I appreciate that the bill will extend to other authorities, such as housing providers in the UK, which may not be the case on the island, but absolutely it's something we'll definitely be happy to consider as part of developing that Safeguarding Vulnerable Adults Bill, or even perhaps as part of the NHS Reform Act that's coming. So this is absolutely something we can look into.
Further supplementary, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for that commitment to look at this? Can I just ask in relation to the Safeguarding Adults Bill, which he referred to, and I do apologise if he said this and I missed it, what is the current timescales on that?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The timescales are all set out in the Island Plan document, but just for clarity, the Safeguarding Vulnerable Adults Bill is due for introduction into the branches during the parliamentary year 2024-2025.
Turn to question 17. I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mrs Corlett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care if he will make a statement on changes to the National Health Service Independent Review Body.
On the Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Changes are proposed to the National Health Service Independent Review Body and the Social Services Independent Review Body as a result of the Department's project to modernise complaints legislation. The regulations that amended the Social Services Act 2011 to establish a new Health and Social Care Ombudsman Body were approved in Tynwald Court last week. It is the intention that this new Ombudsman Body will take over from the two separate independent review bodies when it becomes operational in October. The Ombudsman Body will offer an independent review of unresolved complaints that have been made about provided services under the National Health and Social Care Service delivered primarily through Manx Care. It is intended that the Ombudsman Body will be made up of a legally qualified chairperson and between 7 and 10 other members depending on their expected workload. At least one of the other members must be a registered or recently retired social worker, and at least one must be a registered or recently retired healthcare professional. The remaining mix of experience will be for the Appointments Commission to determine within the scope of the legislation. The remit and review process for the new Ombudsman Body has been set out in regulations that are due to be considered by Tynwald in its next sitting. Drafts of these can be found on the Register of Business. At the Tynwald sitting last week, I hoped that the Department would be able to publish the final versions of these regulations later in that week. Unfortunately, there has been a slight delay in finalising those, which are now due to be considered by the Council of Ministers at their meeting later in this week. The Department will publish those versions as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of next week. I'm advised that the changes are minor and mainly only a change of drafting style, and the content and intention behind the regulations are as currently set out on the Register of Business. The main exception to this is one slight change of approach. The Ombudsman Constitution regulations now explicitly set out the payments to be made to Ombudsman members. This was originally intended to be brought in by amendments to the Attendance Allowances and Travelling Allowances orders under the Payment of Members' Expenses Act 1989. However, it's considered neater and more efficient to simply include the amounts within the regulations themselves, and these amounts have been aligned to payments to the adjudicators under the Financial Services Ombudsman Scheme. Under these regulations, the Ombudsman Body does have some flexibility in how it will operate in line with the regulations, and once established, it will be required to publish a code of practice to set out clearly for the public how to make a complaint, and for them to understand how the Ombudsman Body will work to review that complaint. From October, the existing independent review bodies will continue to work on any live complaint cases, and once those cases have been resolved, those review bodies will be discontinued. However, there is the ability to transfer cases from the IRB bodies to the Ombudsman body if that is considered to be a better option for an individual case and it's agreed by the complainant, the review body and the Ombudsman body. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr Ashford.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I did promise I'd get over to the member some comments on the regulations, and although I'm running slightly late with pulling up together, I promise I will get that to him this week. The Honourable Member referred in another place, Mr Speaker, to one case he was aware of that may need to transfer when we debated this regulations in another place. So that's brought to my mind just literally now, actually, Mr Speaker. Can I ask, and I apologise again if I've missed it, is there provision about those cases that may be currently in, it's not really an appeals process, but a review process? Because at the moment the way it works with, say, the IRBs is if an IRB issues a decision and then the person still disputes that decision, they can ask for another convener to look at that decision again. I don't necessarily see that in any of the draft regulations unless I've actually missed it, again, which I apologise if I have. But is the intention that that would still be in place and that those reviews would transfer in the same way as any of the actual main cases would?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I will have to double-check that, but my understanding is the intention would be for all cases that are currently under consideration by the IRB, whether they are first stage or review stage, will either be closed by the IRB or transferred to the new body at their current state in accordance with an agreement between the Ombudsman body, the IRB and the individual complainant. So my understanding is the regulations are being drafted to provide that level of flexibility, but I will absolutely double-check and make sure that when the regulations come before Tynwald next court, I have a better answer for the Honourable Member.
Supplementary question, Mrs Corlett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I just ask the Minister, the independent review body at the moment are flagging up IT issues, and if there are any IT issues with independent bodies using government systems, will resource be provided to any new body in order that they can carry out their duties quickly and efficiently? Because this is really causing some distress to people who have cases with the IRB at the moment.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm aware of some issues that were historic. My understanding is they have been resolved, but the short answer to the Honourable Member's question is yes, this body will be properly resourced to ensure it fulfils its functions, and if there are any issues in terms of government technology services and the IT support that's provided, I'm sure the Honourable Member for the Cabinet Office will be happy to support me in ensuring that support is provided to the independent Ombudsman.
To question 18, I call the Honourable Member for Oncombe, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the political member for the Communications and Utilities Regulatory Authority whether the authority has any plans to require all utility providers to publish annual financial statements?
Call the political member for the Communications and Utilities Regulatory Authority, Mrs Corlett, to reply.
Mr Speaker, the authority does not currently have legal basis to require all utility providers to publish annual financial statements. And furthermore, it is only responsible for regulating Manx gas at present, not all utility providers. The authority has only been regulating Manx gas for a little over a year and has made all efforts to put in place a fair, transparent and balanced regulatory framework in that time. However, it has been clear from the beginning that there is a need to put in place legislation that will build on this framework and allow the authority to regulate in line with other jurisdictions. Work is already underway on developing this legislation. The first step will be a public consultation on the principles, and that should apply the levers and powers that it would grant the authority. The issues of publication of information and wider transparency within the industry will be considered in the consultation.
Supplementary question, Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just for the record, Mr Speaker, I am asking this question as a constituency MHK and not as the Chairman of Manx Utilities. With Manx Gas now able to enjoy a 5.45% return on the weighted average cost of capital, regardless of the price of natural gas being 50 pence or even 500 pence per therm, surely the Manx public have a right to know what rate of return Manx Gas are enjoying in pounds, pence, shillings and any other currency.
Member to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. All I can say in reply to that is that release of that kind of information or the required release of that information would be a policy decision. Cura do not make policy, and therefore The policymakers must decide if that's appropriate or not, and Cura are more than happy to carry out anything that they are asked to do.
Mr. Collis, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her response this morning. Can I just ask the member, because I'm not too sure exactly who would make the policy then, because I'm not 100% certain myself, just so I know who to go to, because realistically, with the pricing crisis we've had in the last 18 months, the Chief Minister's already alluded on Manx Radio that there is further pain to be coming down the line in the autumn, in the winter. I think the public have a right to actually have these financial statements in the public domain.
Call the member to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That would require legislation, and I think, honestly, the best way to approach this is through the consultation process.
So then to question 19, and calling the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr. Warrenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for the Treasury what plans he has to review the Manx state pension, both in terms of the amount paid and the inflationary link used to uprate the amount.
Call the Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The new Manx state pension was introduced on the 6th of April 2019 following an extensive public consultation. It applies to everyone reaching state pension age after that date and has been well received. Subject to transitional arrangements, the rules for the Manx state pension are much more straightforward and transparent than those of the previous state retirement pensions they replaced, allowing people to properly plan for their income in retirement. Mr. Speaker, there has been long-term stability in the state pension arrangements to enable this to happen. Therefore, I can confirm that Treasury currently has no immediate plans to review the current state pension arrangements which determine the amounts payable to individuals. Turning now to the annual uprating of state pensions as regards people who reached state pension age before the 6th of April 2016, under the terms of the 1977 Social Security Reciprocal Agreement with the UK, we are obligated to pay the same amounts here as are payable in the United Kingdom. People who reach state pension age before April 2016 currently make up by far the largest cohort of pensioners. It would be extremely difficult to break away from these arrangements, and I would strongly advocate against going down that route. As regards people who reach state pension age after the 6th of April 2016, the Isle of Man Government is at liberty to set its own rates. However, it has been Treasury policy to apply the UK's triple lock since it was introduced in 2010. If we should resolve to pay any extra to Isle of Man pensioners over and above that afforded by the triple lock, then I believe we should look to do so using local supplementary schemes. But we must also be conscious of the affordability of any further increases in expenditure out of the Manx National Insurance Fund and the ability of the fund to provide state pensions for generations to come. Treasury has already put in place a number of social security schemes to help those on low and fixed incomes with the increasing cost of living. These include a £300 energy support payment, which was paid in April to pensioners and certain others in receipt of income support, income-based job seeker allowance, or employed persons allowance, plus a £150 long-term benefit support payment to be paid to pensioners and recipients of other long-term benefits within the next few weeks, those who didn't qualify for energy support payments. This is to help with the increasing costs they're facing. Treasury will continue to monitor the effects of the current inflationary pressures and will determine what further help may be necessary in due course. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to mention that the report of the United Kingdom government actuary into the operation of the Manx National Insurance Fund over the 5-year period to the 31st of March 2017 will be laid before next month's sitting of Tynwald. Work is about to start on the production of the report for the 5-year period to the 31st of March 2022. These two reports will help build a picture as to the projected cost of National Insurance Fund benefits, predominantly state pensions, in the island over the next 50 years or so. It may be as a result Treasury will have to bring forward changes to the current scheme to ensure that it remains viable and it does not place an unfair burden on current workers and future generations. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Warrenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Treasury Minister for his comprehensive answer. Just to back up, the living wage at the moment is £402.19. The Manx state pension is £202.23. Does the Minister agree, therefore, that we are forcing our pensioners into a benefit system? And is it appropriate for our pensioners to be forced to rely on the benefit system to survive? does he agree that there's a structural imbalance between the living wage and the pension? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I don't agree with the honourable member. The state pension that's provided is only one part of a series of benefits payable to a range of people who require them. And also the state pension is there to support people, many of whom also have private pension arrangements or additional forms of income. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Colster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response this morning. As he mentioned, the triple lock system was introduced in 2010, and it was in place in order to guarantee that the state pension would not lose the value in real terms, and it's obviously set against a greatest target measured from either average earnings, CPI, or 2.5%. In our budget in 2021, the state pension on the Isle of Man, the basic state pension on the island, was increased by 3.1%. Therefore, can I ask the Minister if they feels that the Treasury actually got that increase wrong, especially when the CPI figure on the Isle of Man was 5.1% or 5% in September?
Treasury Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In answer to the question, is simply quite simple. No, the Treasury didn't get this wrong. In autumn 2021, the UK Government confirmed a one-year suspension of the triple lock formula for annual state pension increases. The move followed concern that a big post-pandemic rise in the United Kingdom average earnings would have meant state pensions increasing by 8%, artificially inflated due to the slip in the average earnings in 2020 due to the large number of people on furlough, followed by a rise in 2021 due to a large number of people returning to work. The average earnings components of the triple lock was therefore disregarded for the April 2022 uprating. Instead, state pensions were increased by the consumer price inflation rate of 3.1% as measured in September 2021. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Ashford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And sticking with the triple lock as a subject, as the Honourable Minister's quite rightly said, in the last budget, quite rightly, the triple lock was part of the triple lock was suspended due to the distorting effects of the pandemic on wage inflation. So that element of the triple lock was suspended for what was supposed to be 1 year only. In the UK, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has made a very clear political statement that the triple lock will be in place for this year. The policy here was that it was a suspension for 1 year. Is it still Treasury's policy that the triple lock will be reinstated for this coming year, which, just for the record, is actually UK CPI in September for the CPI element?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can confirm, as I think I pointed out in my original answer, that the intention of Treasury is to maintain the triple lock in full this year. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Wannenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Treasury Minister, and I'm welcoming his statement about the triple lock. But not all pensioners have supplementary pensions, and for many of the disabled and elderly, they have no real way of increasing their earnings. Could the Minister confirm what they can do to counter such price rises such as food, energy and fuel? And gas, we all know, is now 100% more of what it was this time last year. 3.1% doesn't go very far. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The 3.1% figure, as I said, was introduced in the budget earlier on this year. I've already confirmed that triple lock will be in place for the budget for next year. In terms of the increasing pressures on many members of our community, whether they be pensioners or not, as I've already responded in previous answers, there are a range of targeted benefits that have been brought in by Treasury. Treasury will continue to monitor the situation as we go forward during the summer and into the winter, and there is a commitment from the Council of Ministers and this Government to make sure that that targeted support is maintained right the way through this period of economic volatility. Thank you.
Turn then to question 20. Call the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr. Ashford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to ask the member of the Department of Infrastructure what representations his department has received in relation to pedestrian safety at the section of Johnny Watterson's Lane from its junction with Tromode Road to its junction with Tromode Road.
No, again, in the absence of the Minister for Infrastructure, call Mr. Glover to respond.
Good, my Lord. The Department has identified 2 inquiries in relation to safety at the bottom of Johnny Watterson's Lane. There was a written question which was received in May this year in relation to the analysis of the crossing near Cars Lane, and one inquiry in relation to pedestrian safety and road markings around the pedestrian island. The There appears to be no other records in the Highway Services Customer Services database over the last 3 years in relation to this section of Johnny Watson's Lane and pedestrian safety. But having spoken to the member yesterday, I'm sure he's going to dispute that.
Mr Ashford, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With great foresight, the member for the department is correct. I do find that very disappointing because it's something I've raised on numerous occasions with 2 of the last 3 ministers over the last 5 years and also with the former CEO of the department. So can I ask the member, will the department undertake an assessment of how safe pedestrians are crossing from one side of Tromode to the other, which is something, again, like I say, I've been raising for several years now, because whereas the top half of Johnny Watson's Lane between the Williston estate and the new estate across the road has 2 controlled crossing points, the Johnny Watson's Lane piece running down between Tromode has no controlled crossing points, and children crossing from one side to the other for school, heading to St Ninian's, are taking their life in their hands, and in fact many parents as a result are driving their children to school, which is absolutely ridiculous when we're trying to encourage active travel.
Mr Glover to reply.
Lord, make a helpful suggestion to the honourable member, and that is that if he writes to the minister, the current minister, because there's no record elsewhere, we do have the Minor Improvements Committee. Now, this is something that was approved by Tynwald in this year's budget. 1.5 million was allocated, and this is for, so far we've approved 10 schemes with an estimated value of £725,000. This is a committee has been put in, it's politically led as well. It's to look at and prioritise minor road, footway, crossing and traffic and parking improvement schemes. Items considered by this committee are not maintenance of existing infrastructure, but improvements to the highway network. And then, if that is put in writing, that will then be looked at by this committee.
Supplementary question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm all for helpful suggestions, and I most certainly will take the member for the department up on that. Can I ask the member, when it comes to pedestrian safety, how often are the major arterial routes reassessed? Because certainly, like I say, this is something I've been raising, even though the department doesn't seem to have any record for the last 5 years at least. But how often are the arterial routes assessed? Because the speed of traffic and also the volume of traffic is continuously increasing across many of our arterial routes. And so it is something the department should be keeping an eye on, Mr Speaker.
Mr Glover to reply.
Lord, I can say, because I did ask about this particular section of a road, and between the 1st of January 2019 and the 22nd of June 2022, there have been no personal injury collisions recorded in the section of Johnny Watson's Lane between Ballinard Road and the Tromode junctions.
Supplementary question, Mrs Maltby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member's just made reference to 10 schemes that have been approved from the Minor Improvement Scheme. I wonder if Meadow Campus featured on that scheme that I brought up before, and if you can't answer today, can you please let us know what schemes have
Leave that entirely down to the discretion of the honourable member if he's going to reply, but it's well outside the scope of the question as printed on the order paper. Supplementary question, Mr Ashford. Final one.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The one concern I have with the answer from the honourable member there to my previous question was it shouldn't take a collision for the Highways Division to be assessing safety on our major arterial routes. That really is closing the door after the horse hasn't just bolted, but it's done the full course and come back round into the stable. So I would ask the member again what actual proactive safety checks are done on our major arterial routes, particularly around Douglas, which is getting busier. And as I say, I will be raising with the minister the new minister, that particular one, to see if we can do a minor improvement that will actually be a major improvement for the area.
Mr Glover to reply.
Lord, I can confirm that later this year Highways will start implementing a proactive systems-based approach for analysing the road network to identify how safe our roads are and what can be done to systematically improve them. And certainly I, on behalf of the member, will bring up Johnny Watson's Lane.
I did say final supplementary, but supplementary questions. Question 21, call on the honourable member for Douglas North, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A similar sort of question, but what plan... I'd like to ask the member for the Department of Infrastructure what plans his department has to improve the road condition of Tromode Road, including the visibility of its junction with Cronkley Hour, and whether the previous improvement scheme has been abandoned.
Again, call on Mr Glover to reply on behalf of the Department of Infrastructure.
Gurumad Lord, the department still plan to improve Tromode Road, which is in a poor condition and substandard in several areas, including the Cronkley junction. Following 2 successful public presentations and consultation, the department has reviewed and revised the potential options. The options are still under consideration by the department and no decision has yet been taken. Subject to a decision and Treasury approval, the department plans to undertake this work in 2023-24.
Question, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the meantime, though, there is still issues with that junction. Is it the department's intention, because obviously the road surface needs doing, to do it all in one go, rather than maybe splitting it off and looking what can be done now to improve visibility? Because 23-24 is still a substantial period of time away, and eventually there is going to be a collision on that junction if things aren't improved.
Mr Glover to reply.
Gurumad Lord, I'm not aware of any plans at the moment, but I will come back to the member and find out what the current situation is rather than the new plans.
Question, Mr Wannenberg.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I ask the member, he alluded to a consultation period with those residents around that area. Could he tell me when that took place and what the response was? Thank you.
Mr Glover.
Gurumad, yeah, I can tell you that a number of options were looked at. It was also a consultation to do with flooding from the river down there at Tromode, as well as a redesign of the Tromode area. The area plan for the east has now been approved and taken into account resulting increased traffic congestion, I believe, is why it's just being revisited. But certainly that consultation, I don't have when it took place with me here, but I can find that answer out. But I know it was quite an extensive consultation and a number of options were looked at, and a plan was now being produced. Thank you.
Further supplementary, Mr Ashford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Honourable Member assure us that what this will focus on is what needs to be done down there, which is the fixing of the road, to ensure that it's got a long-term viable lifespan, and also improvement on junction safety, rather than, as the previous scheme proposed was, from my mind, an absolutely ludicrous over-the-top scheme with a bus stop to nowhere, and also trying to change the layout and volume of traffic that's going down Tromode Road.
No, sorry, Mr Glover.
Gurumad Lord, I can confirm that politically and strategically we have met and looked at the scheme that was being proposed, including the bus to stop to nowhere, as the Honourable Member puts it, and all those factors are being taken into consideration. Thank you.
Now that completes question 21. I understand that questions 22, 23 and 24 to be held over to Tynwald. Thank you, Mr Morehouse. And having dealt with the legislation after question 14 for the benefit of Hansard, that concludes the business on the order paper this morning. The House will then stand adjourned until our next sitting, which will be on Tuesday the 5th of July at St John's. Thank you, honourable members.